George, are you there?
Hey, buddy, can you hear me? Can you see me?
I hear you. I see you. How are you?
Good, man. Sorry for the delay. Been one of the moments.
That's okay. Like I was saying, I was telling people, like, I never guaranteed this because you were still coming back from your trip.
Yeah.
So thank you for making the time.
No problem. You can see my face. It's windblown from being on the motorcycle and sleeping up in a tent up north. It was freezing cold, but I got all the wind blow from that.
Yeah. So I saw you went, it was like a camping / motorcycle trip. What was it?
Yeah. I just need to get to the city, so I throw a tent and a bunch of stuff on the back of my motorcycle, and I ride up without too much of a plan. Just try to find a place a few hours north of where I am in LA and go to the high desert, into the woods, something like that. You know.
Do you like bring a lot of food, or you like hunt for your food or anything?
No, I don't hunt for my food. Well, I probably could, I suppose. I'm a vegan, so it's not that hard to find plants. But I could. No. I had packs of veggie sausages and some vegetables, and just throw them on a fire. Start a fire, basically, and cook it all on a fire.
Interesting. That's awesome. So again, thank you so much. I know you're a busy guy. But at the same time, I've seen you in other interviews, and I really do appreciate the fact that you take time to speak not only with me, but other people, and just tell your story and what you do. And which is why I want to talk to you, because me personally, I've so far talked to and I've highlighted other Canadian artists and media personalities. And you're obviously one that's very important in this landscape, in the Canadian landscape. So first off,
You're very kind. Thank you.
I don't know how this all happened. Like, again, like, I don't, when you somehow started following me, I was like kind of shocked. I was like, okay, cool. I think you were tagged in one of my videos where I talked about Liam Lynch, United States of Whatever.
Oh yeah, because I played that song on the radio not that long ago.
Yeah, so I think maybe people tagged you and then you saw it. You're like, oh, I guess I'll just follow this guy. I don't know, whatever. But I just thought it was hilarious. And if you can maybe talk about like those type of songs again, because I love promoting those songs that people forgot about. Those like deep cuts, if you want to call it that. I don't know. When it comes to like those like forgotten songs, like what is it about those songs that you think people like they light up when they hear those type of songs?
I think there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, thanks for having me. It's nice to be with you. I think there's a couple of things to consider. Number one, sometimes they just caught a moment. Right, there's a song that caught a moment, and sometimes the song was really great, and so those two factors play a role in whether or not they hit a certain level of audience at a time. Right now, but because they're not classics, because they don't have the weight of the industry behind them, because they're not often from a legacy artist, it was just a one and done kind of thing. What ends up happening is they sort of get forgotten about over time when they get programmed. Most radio stations program in the least interesting way. It's some version of an algorithm, or, music directors and program directors take the same selections from one national program director. So there's just not a lot of interesting stuff happening in most music radio, and so those songs, because they're not easily recallable, just kind of get forgotten. And they just but they worked for a reason. So when a later era hears it, there's a really high chance they're going to go, fuck, that was dope. What was that? Now, the Liam Lynch thing connected to MTV. The video was kind of funny. It's a minute and 30 seconds or however long it is. That's one of those moments where you just go, oh, that's funny. That's really funny. And that's a time when everybody was just saying whatever. So it totally added up. But a lot of times it is just people forgot about it, but they still worked for a reason. And so when you hear them, you're like, what's amazing? You can go anywhere in most countries and hear Harvey Danger's Flagpole Sitta, and it works. It works. That you hear that song now, and there's that one line, right? Only stupid people are breeding, that kind of thing. There's things about that song. When it came out, I was on the radio. It was a hit. And then people just forgot about it. But a DJ will play it. You'll hear it in arena. You'll be driving in some place, and that'll pop on. You're like, what? This song still lands. When I would DJ clubs where the audience was, not interested in that era of music, I dropped that tune and it still landed because there was something really special about it. And I think it's really hard to nail down why it's special, but it just is.
Yeah, and what I loved about MuchMusic is there was, again, so many songs and artists that maybe weren't super successful, but again, when people revisit their music and when I like to promote them on my channel, again, it's people like, it just brings them flashbacks. And as you know, the joy, or one of the the beautiful things about music is it just brings people back to a certain time or a memory. Like I can remember what's it called, Stabilo, like Flawed Design, like just tunes that people love but forgot about. Speaking of MuchMusic, and you said this before in other interviews, even though you weren't there for too long, you were there for about 4 or 5 years. It's at the end of the day, that's what people know you for. And you've talked about why, but if you don't mind maybe sharing again, like why do people know you mostly for MuchMusic, would you say?
Now, I forget what I said in other interviews.
I can tell you.
What did I say?
Well, you said a few different things, I guess, because people have asked you the same questions, of course. And I think it's just because you've mentioned how it was just so important to kids at that time, and how, you made everyone feel like they mattered, especially people, minority groups.
That is definitely what we did. I think it's also because you never know what you got till it's gone. That theory, that philosophy. MuchMusic doesn't exist anymore. And when you look at the insanity of content creation and algorithms and all of that, lots of good stuff in there. I think people just realize that what Much was really special, and it really was special. Like we were the inmates running the place. They hired us, they trusted us. The hosts and the producers, we told the stories we wanted to tell and built the narrative we wanted to build, and it was one that you had to be really kind and inclusive and welcoming and all that other stuff. It was really like that was an important part of the philosophy. You didn't go on the air and act like an idiot. I mean, you could act like you were having fun and be a joker, but if you went on the air and were exclusive, you weren't going to be on the air. The mandate right from the top was that you actually had to be about something, and you couldn't make the audience feel badly for who they were. There was none of that. It was pro-gay, pro-trans, pro-woman, pro-diversity. It was all these things 20 odd years ago. We were having conversations with Britney Spears that get circled around now because we were talking about real issues back then. That sort of stuff doesn't happen anymore. What the benefit of social media is that everybody had access to the audience, right? The downside to that, and this is a really big downside, is that there was no critical thinking involved. Social media exists without any kind of, anybody can go say whatever they want, and the only place where there's a response is in the comments, but there is nobody holding the person accountable for what they're saying. Where when we were doing interviews, if somebody said something ridiculous in an interview, we would call them on it. And it was happening in the moment. Right. And you couldn't then just go, oh, the haters are saying what the haters are saying. No, because it was a conversation. So you couldn't run and hide in that scenario the way you can on social media. Here you can block a comment you don't like. Here you can do all these other things. Of course, there's lots of value in it, but there's no actual accountability in the moment in that way. So at Much, we wouldn't put an artist on the air that would say insane shit without calling them on it. There's no chance. Right. And I think that people now realize just how special that was. Also, another reason why people, I think, remember a lot of us from it, certainly that era, we were kind of the last of the era, Rick and I, and that sort of, Rachel Perry and Namageni, like that, Bradford, that was the last of that kind of run, Sukyin. I think what you had was, you got a lot of people today who are our age or who are watching us growing up, who realized just what a nice time it was to have that kind of stuff. And so they're trying to explain it to their kids. It's like, you guys have no idea we would run home to watch this shit. And so I think it's just in the consciousness a lot because people really miss it. I really believe people miss it. I had such a blast. I thought I was going to work there forever. I thought I was going to work there forever. It was incredible.
Yeah, no, it was, again, like you said, it's, I think we don't realize like what we had until we lost it. And I'm glad you mentioned a lot, but when you mentioned about Britney Spears, because I was going back to your interviews and I couldn't find too many of your interviews on YouTube, but one was, well, the one that popped up right away was Britney Spears in 2001. And it was a great interview and you could tell she was very engaged. And I think, maybe I'm crazy for saying this, but I think she felt very relaxed around you because you could hear her accent, like her Southern accent, which made me think like psychologically, she wouldn't do that unless she was comfortable with you, I feel like. You know what I mean? And the one thing
I turned that interview down. I didn't want to do it.
Why?
It was offered to me. Honestly, because I think interviewing the heavily managed, fabricated scenario is just not the kind of interview that I wanted to do. I don't want to be a part of a 100% marketing exercise.
Mm.
I understand that all art has a marketing component to it. But my then boss, a guy called David Kynes, quite rightly said to me, "You can't be a real interviewer unless you can interview people like this too." And he was right. I was like, you're right. I'm being too precious here. I sat down to that interview and tried to warn her because I saw what was happening around her. That's why I asked her those questions. It's because I saw shit going on around there. Like, it was such an insane scenario. And you hear now people talk about Britney. They attacked me for that interview, by the way. I was attacked for that interview by Britney Stans back in the day. How dare you question her? How dare you think that Britney isn't 100% in control? I was attacked by the Stans, who are now all like, "Oh fuck, they controlled her," right? Because they couldn't see that. They couldn't see that shit. But I was attacked early enough for that interview. But there are a lot of people who talk about, her family. There are a lot of players in that game, in the record business, who are complicit. I watched Britney Spears order an alcoholic drink at like 15 or 16 years old. And I watched this poor record rep not know what to do. Handed it to a senior person in the music business who took that alcoholic drink and handed it to a teenage Britney. And like, a lot of people made a lot of money off her back. And I just didn't want to be a part of that circus. I think, pop music in general it's really hard to get to the truth because the artists are so, I don't want to say they're protected, because they're not actually protected. They're just so manicured. And the really special ones are the ones that you can get through to. And so in that interview with Britney, we actually had a moment. Where I could see that she was starting to loosen up. But every time I challenged, you could see her kind of not sure what to do. And she would just rely on the same thing: family and God, family and God, family and God. When anybody goes to family and God all the time, 90% of the time, there's more to it.
Yeah, and it's just crazy because there was a line that stuck out to me, and he said, "The system is designed for you not to survive." You said that to her, and at the time, probably no one thought anything of it. I'm sure the people in her camp were like, "Holy shit," but nothing ever happened. And now you look back, and yeah, it's incredible. So
yeah, one day I'll tell you other shit that happened that day. Pretty crazy, man. But look, I'm glad I got to do the interview. I'm glad. I didn't get it right. I didn't get it right all the time, for sure. Remember when I started at MuchMusic, that was like my first real TV job. So I was also just learning how to do it. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just figuring out as I went along, and I had really great people that I worked with. They helped me. I helped them. We all tried to build a little club together. But we were young too. I was still in my 20s, right? I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I was just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it's crazy because not only you, and even before you, Master T interviewed her, which I was surprised, because that wasn't probably his forte either. But I'm sure they asked him to do it, and maybe he said no, I don't know, and he did it, right?
Yeah, no, so. Master T is a legend, man. When I got there, what I always respected about Master T was that he was nice to me, but he wasn't like overly ingratiating to me. He was like, he saw me floating around. Who is this guy? Like when I first met at MuchMusic, I don't know if you want to hear the story now about how I first got to the MuchMusic thing, but eventually I had done some interview on tape that they saw. So they let me in to screen some tape of other interviews before I decided I wanted to be there, before they offered me. And what was crazy is that it was just me floating around, and I saw Master T. There was like no security watching me. They just trusted. They trusted us. And Tony's like looking at me like, who is this fucking guy? And it was only after I did I had a couple of moments live where he saw some stuff that he showed up and he welcomed me. And I was grateful for that because I have no problem earning people's space. He was always nice, but he didn't act like overly friendly with me. He was always super cool. Tony was like legit the whole way, and I'm ever grateful that he welcomed me in and helped me, but let me be a part of what he was doing there, because he's like, Master T was the best. To me, Rick Campanelli Tony. Master T used to call Ricky the franchise, and that's what that became the nickname. He was the franchise, and we knew that. We knew that we were all living in Rick's world. And Rick was so cool about it. And so Tony and myself really appreciated Rick because we knew what it was like to be on TV. And we just saw the way Rick did it, like an absolute boss.
Yeah, and you mentioned this in other interviews where you said Rick's the best. You're like, well, actually, Rick is best, but you said, but Tony, Master T had the hardest job. at Much, right?
Yeah, everybody now, this era, they only listen to hip hop. You meet a lot of kids today who only listen to hip hop. The media loves trying to capitalize on it. The industry loves capitalizing on it. But back in the day, that wasn't the case. People loved it, but it wasn't getting any support, any love in the industry. And it was Tony that was making it happen. It was Master T that was making it happen. Like Master T, the entire hip hop industry owes him. Not just him. There were a lot of builders, a lot of amazing record companies like Big C. They're great builders in the country. But Master T had the most high profile gig of doing that. Of doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can go on and on about that. I know we could talk a lot about Much, and I want to still talk a little bit more because talking about Rick, I was lucky enough. I've only been interviewing people for a few months, and he was the first person I interviewed, Rick. And I was super excited about that. Like, as you know, just a very gracious, nice guy. He's never changed, I really think. And so when I spoke to him during the interview, I told him about when you were being interviewed by Oliver George, and how when you brought up in that interview when Oliver George mentioned Rick, your face lit up. And I was just telling Rick about how you described him to himself, I guess. And Rick obviously was, he was very appreciative of what the kind words you've had for him. And when I messaged him a couple of days ago, he's actually in Qatar for the World Cup. I'm like, I'll just message him, see if he answers. I'm like, any stories or anything you want to say for my interview that I might do? He's like, just tell him about the time we went on a road trip from LA to Vegas for his punk show. Can you say anything about that?
Rick's the greatest. Yeah, I don't know what I can say. I was in LA. And Rick happened to be in LA on a separate trip. And I don't know who he was here to interview. He was down here to interview somebody, and his interview canceled. It was some big artist, like a pop star kind of thing. And that interview canceled. So I happened to be down here. I wasn't working. I was down here for meetings for something else. And, Rick and his producer, who was my producer, one of my closest friends at Much, was a guy called Alex Liu. They were down here. And I said, you want to go to Vegas? Rick and I both loved to gamble. So we're like, yeah, let's go to Vegas. So we hopped in a rental car that I had, and we drove to Vegas. And as we were filming, we decided to film an episode of the punk show on the way to Vegas. And I believe we pulled into Vegas around 3 p.m. and threw to commercial break, saying we'll be right back and give you a tour of Las Vegas. We didn't come back from commercial break to do the tour of Vegas. We came back from commercial break at 7:30 in the morning. Rick and I had been up all night. We had lost way more money than we had. He had a drink in his hand. We both had a tremble of realizing that we just made some crazy decisions that backfired on us. And it was so bad that now the show was funny, and then later, one of our friends who was in a very well-known band at the time ended up was really gunned, and we ended up finding out what hotel they were in. They fell asleep with their door open. So we went into their room at night to try to wake them up, to get them to come party with us. It was like just insanity after insanity after. But here's what's so funny about that was that I had to call him the night that the episode was going to air. And I called him about 30 minutes before, and I said, hey, just on the off chance your family is there, do not let them watch MuchMusic tonight. He's like, oh, shit, thank you. So suddenly him and his family had plans so that nobody could turn. And this is pre-on-demand days, right? So nobody could actually, once the episode aired, like nobody ever saw it again. It aired that one time. I think I have a copy somewhere. So I had to call him to warn do not let your family watch this episode. He's like, oh, fuck, we got to go. So boom, everybody's out of the house. That was Rick. Rick and I, he was by far the person I was the closest with at Much in that respect. And he's the guy that told me to do your interview. Rick's the one that told me to do this with you. He texted me about it.
Wait, yeah, what?
So that's how it happened. I think because you talked to Rick, and Rick sent me a note, and is the one that told, because listen, I do lots of stuff, but I say no to lots of stuff. It's just random and timing and whatever, right? And also I'm not always the guy that wants to talk about yesterday. I can, but it's not always my default. But Rick told me to do it. And Rick doesn't tell me to do stuff very often.
Oh, why?
Yeah, so that's why I did this. It's because of Rick. I'm grateful to do it. But I got to tell you, man, in my life, I have been so privileged to work with and be around some truly incredible people. And right near the top is Rick. And I think I said this previously, but I don't know if you'd seen this one. When I got to MuchMusic, Rick, and I've worked at other places where the main hosts have played it the other way, right? Rick could have been difficult. Rick could have been protective. Rick could have been all kinds of things like most people I've worked with are. And Rick wasn't. Rick was the opposite. He was now we had met in the previous, we had met once before, we had seen a basketball game together. So we knew each other. I was on the radio interviewing the same bands that were going through MuchMusic. So we had a professional respect for each other, but he didn't need to be so fucking cool. And he was cool. And he was, honestly, like the greatest. To me, Rick Campanelli is my life. I would constantly try to get Rick other jobs because I didn't think much of treating him right. Like I was constantly trying. Like I'm such a believer in Rick to this day, and I don't think I would have had the run at MuchMusic that I had, or I would have had the same memories that I have if it wasn't for Rick and my relationship with Rick. Like Rick Campanelli is the best. Like I'll say this to the day they put me in the grave. They'll never find my body, so that won't happen. But Rick's the best.
Yeah, no, and if what you say is true about him messaging you, then I definitely would like to thank him for that. I really do appreciate that. So that's amazing. Yeah. Let's move on from that. Again, I know we could talk forever.
Somebody in your comments is mentioning Martin Streak as well. That's another level. Like I got to do the Thursday 30 with Martin in Toronto before I went to Much. And Martin and I had such a great thing together on the air that when I was first approached about the Much job, I was an outside party who said, "Hey, do you want to go meet the MuchMusic people?" I said, "Sure." I mean, I didn't really watch MuchMusic. I didn't have cable. It wasn't like part of my thing, MuchMusic. And I had such a great thing with Marty that I didn't think it was going to go. I didn't think I was going to go anywhere. So when Denise Donlin, and she wrote about this in her book, when she first interviewed me, she said to me, "So why do you want to be at MuchMusic?" And I said, I don't. Like, I don't know that I do. Like, what do you mean? Like, what? I thought you were pitching me. Like, it wasn't part of my mindset because Marty and I had this one of a kind thing. I've been so lucky. I've had 3 people I've been on the air with where I have that kind of, where I've been so lucky. So I didn't have any real interest in going to MuchMusic, like, at all, because I felt like what was happening at the Edge with Martin and I was really special. And I was so lucky to work with Martin, and I miss him all the fucking time. All the time. He's been gone a long time now. And I miss him all the time. And then when I got to Much, again, I was a bit not sure, but it was Rick and Master T and, Larissa. They're all amazing. All of them are amazing. And Rachel Perry, who is, I think, the most underrated TV person in the history of Canadian television. I think Rachel Perry doesn't get nearly enough credit for the work she did. She was absolutely incredible, and that era of Much was dynamite. I'll be right back. Hold on one sec.
Incredible. Oh, I love his place.
Sorry, my doorbell rang. Sorry about that.
Is it food? Is it delivery? What is?
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. So anyway, that was Much was such a special time. I still work with people today from the Much era. Like the person I work with the closest in my non-Apple stuff is a woman called Tanya Netchev, who is one of the reasons who helped shape the kind of interviewer that I would become. She played a huge role in showing me the ways to present myself and to be. And I still work with her to this day.
Wow. So you've interviewed tons of people, not only just on Much, but outside that, like I said, that was only a fraction of your career. The Hour you did that for 10 years or so. Yeah. You've had done other radio jobs before MuchMusic, after MuchMusic, currently, of course. Would you say, and you said this again in other interviews, but would you say, it sounds like you were self-taught overall. I mean, some people had influence on you, but you talk about work ethic and you put in the work. I mean, you cited once, was it 3 years in a row, you claimed that every day you were ran your own like fake radio show?
Almost, I mean, probably longer than that. Probably
Yeah.
longer than you. Yeah. Well, what coincided with I had quit partying. I'd quit, like I went straight edge, so I decided to clean up, and I needed to distract myself with things that weren't going out. So any day that I wasn't working, I would just go to work I worked at a radio station in Toronto called The Fan. I was 22 years old. That's so long ago. Can't believe it. And what I did was I would draw the blind pre-internet, right? So I would draw the blinds. I would wait for, in a production studio, I'd wait for a guy who was doing overnight radio at another station down the hall to go for, I could tell when he would be going to, by the way he walked, when he was going outside for a smoke. So I knew that when he was going for a smoke, I had a few extra moments. So I would go into the studio, steal the playlist, photocopy it, return it to him without him knowing, take a bunch of CDs that he's not going to play, run into another room where nobody had seen me do any of this stuff, and I would wait till the top of the hour, boom, and I would press play, and I would fake a radio show, and I did this every single day. I suspect it is the single most impactful moment in my career when you look back, because it was in that time where I did the kind of work that you can't make up, right? You can't, you can't, what I mean by make up, and you can fake it and invent it, but I'm saying you can't catch up to that. Like when you go, especially when you're trying to clean up and you're trying to rearrange your life, you have to build new habits. So I built the kind of habits that were absolutely insane. And that pace has not relented since that. I mean, that was 30 years ago, 28 years ago, 29 years ago. And my pace has not relented. I suspect I learned that from my mother. I come from an immigrant family where we didn't have careers, we have jobs, right? Nobody in my family, I don't think, ever asked me what I wanted to do for a living. That was never the story. We just have jobs. So to me, I treated every part of my career like a job. This is my job. It's art to me. It's craft, but it's a job. So I treat it as such. But it was all in those really, really early days when I was working at the Fan. And, that was before the CRTC and the government of Canada ruined everything by allowing multiple ownership of radio stations. Back then, you couldn't own more than a couple of stations in a market, right? FMs in a market or AMs. So we were owned by a company based in Quebec called Telemedia, who had just recently purchased an Easy Rock radio station, which wasn't even in our building. The only other thing that was in our building was like an overnight syndicated show. That's the guy that I would take his stuff from. And it was still very much like a family that was being run, right? And that gave me the opportunity to kind of develop in a way that you don't get to do anymore.
No, absolutely. I mean, I worked in radio a bit and just promotions and being a board op for Bell Media when near the end of it, it just became Bell Media, owned by Bell Media. It was owned by the Greenberg family, I believe it was, for a bit. Anyways, so yeah.
You worked there. Do you want my anger button to press it when you mention their name?
I can give it to some of my friends that are in the business still. I'm not, but I'm so glad. I mean, and again, you brought up your mom in every interview because she's obviously played a huge role in your life. And I love one thing you mentioned, and again, just for people who don't know, I love how you said she would drop you off at libraries and at old people, seniors' homes, and that's how kind of you learned how to help people and talk to people, because you said it's your responsibility to be there for people who don't have people, which I love. So can you, just again, talk about that experience?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think like my mom, I was raised by a single mom. And one of the reasons why I'm excited to talk about my mother is because to show love to single parent homes, because it's so difficult. This is in the 70s and 80s, right? It was really, really difficult. She was a young, single mom. We had no money. We grew up below the poverty line, way below. And it was what she did. I can't even comprehend how she pulled it off. I can't even comprehend how my mom pulled off what she did back in the day. She said to me years later that she was just trying. She was just trying. She's like, I didn't know what was going to work. I was just trying to keep me out of trouble. And yeah, that's to me, that's the thing. Also, I'm from the west side of Toronto, right? I'm from Jane and Wilson, Chalk Farm, Rexdale, Malton. We're just cut different. When we're from there, we're just cut different. And It was a very dangerous neighborhood, but you would never really know it until you really knew it, you know? And everybody was like just trying their best to, because we learned, here's the thing, man. I learned really early that whatever this idea, when people, I used to watch TV in Canada and watch the country they're talking about, how everybody bragged about what Canada was. That is not the country I grew up in. That is not the country any of us grew up in. And in my neighborhood, we grew up in a very different country. You know, a bunch of years ago when everybody's like, oh my God, how can the system be like, I was never surprised when the system fell apart because the system was never there for us. I never grew up believing in the police or the church or the government or the school. I didn't believe in any of that stuff growing up because in our neighborhoods, we knew they weren't on our side. They were filled with people who were trying their best, but the institutions weren't on our side. And my mom taught me that though that may be the case, you're not a victim. Doesn't matter. You got to figure this out anyway. The cavalry ain't coming, right? And to me, that's maybe the great, my mom taught me love, but she taught me that the cavalry ain't coming. You got to figure it out. You can sit there all you want and talk about what needs to change, but most of that's out of your hands. So what are you going to do now? And so I decided to take that and try to change the system by using my platform the way I have and trying to do what I do. But I learned that from my mom. That you have to, this is a big fight out there every single day, but don't let that, bog you down. Like I don't have any, I don't have a chip on my shoulder about this system because I knew what it was from the very beginning. I wasn't surprised when, everything fell apart.
Yeah, and it's obvious, it's very easy to, I guess, throw a pity party for yourself, right? But that's not going to get you anywhere.
No,
so
definitely, yeah, definitely. No. My grandmother and my mom, the shit they had to go through, the shit that first of all just coming to Canada and to build a space for our family. We have a really lovely family, and so lucky that our family all gets along. Everybody's cool. Like we wouldn't have that if it wasn't for the work my grandmother did, and then my mom and my aunt and my uncle. So there's nothing in my DNA that laments anything that way because that would be disrespectful to the work that they did in my mind. I'm not telling this is important, dude. I'm not telling anybody how they should feel about the world or how they should respond. You can have pity parties. You can feel all the shit you want. Like everybody has their own path. It's just in my wiring, there was no way I was going to be that way. There was no way I was going to be that way. I watched my grandmother work like I couldn't believe it. And there's no way I'm going to sit there. Oh, but no, fuck that. I honor my grandmother's commitment to me. I honor my mom's commitment to me, my uncle and my aunt's commitment to me, So I'm not saying anybody should do it this way. I'm just saying this is how I did it.
Yeah. Something incredible about you, and I don't know if anyone's ever told you, it's like on one end, like it's funny because, you said you're straight edge, so no drugs, alcohol. But at the same time, I feel like you're very balanced in life. Where, you like to enjoy yourself, but you also, you're also aware of all the injustices that are happening in the world. So I guess if I can ask you, Eric, your opinion, like how do you maintain that balance, would you say? Because again, it is so easy to go maybe to one side or the other.
I think that nothing is static, right? It's a practice. I think that you have to constantly work at having a better understanding of the whole picture. And so I don't ever reach a place and feel like I've plateaued, right? In terms of my worldview, I am very balanced in a way, but I haven't always been. Like I was oblivious. I would just put my head down and work. I caused a lot of carnage in my life, not being more present. I felt like I was building something. So I've done it wrong most of my life, right? I've always had a good worldview, but I think that's because of punk rock. I just didn't apply it to my own personal life and my own I had a better understanding of the macro versus the micro. So when I realized that, and I think this is what happens to a lot of people, certainly as you get older, and I've been so privileged to be able to talk to so many interesting people. So you get worldviews from everybody else. I've been in the heads of strangers for so long, right? And when you research people and then you speak with them, you you can see what they say versus what you know they came from versus how they are today. There's a whole bunch of things that come into play. So I feel like I gained a better understanding of the human condition by spending all this time with strangers and learning about them and having them, through the artifice of an interview, open up to me, right? They were saying shit to me they wouldn't always say to other people because I would just talk to them. I would ask them questions. And what I realized is that over time, here's the person you think you are. Here's the person you are. The real struggle in life is, are you going to get the person you think you are to become more like the person you actually are? Or are you going to try to do the other way? I tried to do the other way. I tried to get the person that I actually was to become more like the person I thought I was. I didn't make any excuses for myself. When I had the kind of behaviors that I was like, oh, fuck, that's not who I am. I shouldn't be that way. But it is who I am because it's how I act. And how I act is actually who I am, not what I think I am, right? So I started to become very conscious of my choices to be better that way, right? That is the thing. And I think a lot of people feel I don't let myself off the hook, is what I'm saying, for the things that I have done. I mean, I don't break the law. I'm not talking that kind of shit. I mean, I did when I was younger, but that's a whole other life. What I mean is, like, when my behavior didn't match what I thought my values were, then I realized that, oh, fuck me. And I couldn't blame anything. It's like, oh, my conditioning, my neighborhood, all that's true. But what good is that? What good is, like, identifying that something amorphous that, like, the people who are part of my conditioning were also subject to their own traumas that they were never given the language or the tools to unpack. So you just have a legacy of none of us knowing what the fuck we're doing because we're animals. We're just fucking animals. And in my mind, right? So if we're just animals, every generation needs to do something, or every era needs to do something to figure out how to be a better version and maybe pass down less trauma to the next one, right? Pass down next trauma. So I just took it upon myself to hold myself to a very high standard in a way that I hadn't in the past. Because in the past, I thought I was just going to work. Because what happens is, and I don't know what your experience is, or people watching what their experience is, you put your headphones on, you go into a studio when you're 20 years old, which is what I did. I come out of the studio and I'm 50 years old and the whole fucking world has changed, but I'm still the guy under the headphones, right? I'm still the guy under the headphones. So I still think I'm that guy. I got like, no, you got to change your behavior. You got to do this. You got to do that. You got to do this. You got to be more intentional. You got to use all these fucking catchphrases that you reject early on in your life because you realize there's value in them,
Yeah. Wow. If I could play psychologist for a second, because again, you grew up with a single mother, and since your father wasn't present, did you find yourself ever looking for male figures or influences in your life, or not really? Or was that your mom for you?
My uncle was pretty incredible. Mm-hmm. My uncle Paul was pretty incredible. There's another guy in the neighborhood, a guy called Lon, who many years later my mother married. Incredible. So I would say this. I saw some pretty good behavior modeled by men in my life over time. But what I did was remove the need for it. So I wasn't looking to replace, and that's something that I don't do now. I don't try to replace something. Like, I don't grieve something that doesn't exist in the first place, right? So I don't do that. So not having a father present in my life, like, who cares? Like why should I? The world doesn't promise you anything. So I didn't walk and act like I was missing something, because I wasn't missing anything. I just had a different experience than what I think the traditional family structure was supposed to be. But I had my mom's family, my grandmother, my aunt, my uncle, my sister, my mom, and I, come on. Like, my family, I put my family up against any army in the world, I don't need an army. I got these people, So yeah, so I never actually felt like I was missing anything, so I didn't replace it. But I will say this. Now, as I unpack a lot of my youthful days, I realized what I connected to, which were interesting people who expressed themselves in powerful ways. Chuck D, Joe Strummer were enormous influences on my life. Enormous influences on my life. Patti Smith became a big influence on my life. Bob Dylan became a big influence on my life. And so I found, and George Carlin. So I actually found that in these other guys, I saw, I'm just going to watch and see what they do, right? I didn't do it intentionally, but clearly I went on a path. I mean, dude, I have tattoos on my body from bands that I decided to fall in love with when I was fucking 10. Like, I was 10, and they still drive me, right? So I found this stuff in other places, but I wasn't really looking for it. Right. I was also just really lucky. And this is the thing that's really hard to explain to anybody who's a little bit younger, because they hate when guys my age say this. So I don't say it in the same way. But bro, when I was a kid from 5 to 15, essentially punk, what became modern metal, thrash, hip hop, new wave, the next real powerful stage of electronic music, all happened from when I was 5 to 15. So every single week, there was something new that was happening that was shocking to the system. And none of it was about opting in. Whereas now you see a lot of artists who are dealing with, they're trying to, and I get it, it's commerce, getting with the business and the brands and the influence and all that stuff. All these artists that we're talking about were existing outside the system. They made the system change for them. And so that was an enormous set of influences in my life that maybe I didn't know at the time. I found that out over years. First time you hear Public Enemy, first time you hear Beastie Boys, first time you see Patti Smith singing Gloria on TV in the late 70s, this woman dressed like she's in the Ramones, and her opening line is, Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. Like, nobody's fucking doing that. Nobody's fucking doing that now. Sinead O'Connor, when I'm a teenager, 20 years old, maybe ripping the picture of the Pope on the air, saying, fight the real enemy. She was a hero to us, right? So all this stuff became not teachers, not mentors, not people to follow, but what they did was led with action. It was a series of actions that made me realize, you are nothing if you're not doing the thing you think you are. You've got to be doing the thing, and the thing is always changing. That's what I'm saying. It's a practice. Life's a practice. And so not having a father was like, to be honest with you, I feel blessed that I didn't have one. A lot of my friends who are super fucked is because their dad stuck around, right? Like, or their mom stuck around, and they learned some really unhealthy behaviors from that. I was just so lucky that I had a mom who was just, my home was filled with love. My mom was a gangster, dude. Like, she did not let me get away with shit. She was not my friend. My mom said to me time and time again, I'm not your friend. My job is not for you to like me. My mom said to me, when you get arrested, not if, when you get arrested and you go to jail, don't call me. I'm not coming to get you. Because she knew if I got arrested, there's a high likelihood I did the thing. Mm-hmm. So sleep it off in jail and think about what you did. So I grew up with that kind of like gangster tough love, but still lots of love. My mom did not for a minute let me think that I could just walk through this life without consequence. And so I didn't need anything else. I had an amazing family structure. Plus, when you're from the Rex or from Malton, like, your neighborhood corrects you along the way. You step out of line in my neighborhood, someone very quickly smacked you back into place. And it wasn't your mom that would always do that. It would be like the fucking neighborhood would correct you. And I'm grateful that worked for me. It didn't work for everybody, but it definitely worked for me.
Well, I could see then why you became who you are, because, I don't know, myself, I grew up in the 90s in Montreal with like the Backstreet Boys, and here I am. So
you broke the Backstreet Boys. What, didn't Quebec break the Backstreet Boys?
Oh, did we? I don't know. Why did we?
No, dude, look into it. Like, I'm telling you, like, I believe that the first market where Backstreet Boys broke big was
Germany.
Quebec.
Germany.
No, Quebec.
Sure.
When I've talked to them, they've talked about how it was Quebec that really, now maybe Germany was happening simultaneously, but they talked about how Quebec played an enormous role in getting the Backstreet Boys going.
Interesting. Okay. Uh, uh, so yeah, obviously music has one of the biggest influence on in your life. And so besides, work with music and everything, you have a lot of, you do a lot of volunteer work, humanitarian work. One of them, of course, is the Canadian Music Therapy Fund, which I've actually looked into recently and I would like to get involved. So I'm going to look into that more soon. Can you just explain it? Because again, I don't know too much about it, but can you just talk about what the Canadian Music Therapy Fund is?
Yeah, so it's a scholarship that I created with the Canadian Music Therapy Trust Fund, and the idea is to help pay for the education to train music therapists. A lot of people talk about how music is impactful in their life and is therapeutic for them, but music in the hands of a trained therapist has an enormous amount of impact for people who are either in palliative care or suffering a variety of realities that are very different than what we have right now, than what you would and I are currently, at least on the surface, what it looks like we're experiencing. The Canadian music therapy doesn't get a lot of love from institutions, so it's the government's not where it needs to be on that, which we hope to change. Partly, I can't speak as exactly why they're not, but I think there's a part of it that it's not results based, right? So you can't sit there and say we have a cure, like not results that are easy to explain. Music therapy is really about kindness and empathy and company and helping people heal through music, but healing in their own way with post-traumatic stress realities for people. Music therapy has an enormous impact. You see somebody here on there, somebody who has autism, somebody with autism, it's a huge part of it. But again, a big part of it is palliative care. People have end of life, and the music therapist comes in and brings them enormous joy. And I just wanted to be a part of it. Music has given me so much, and it fucking saved my life. Like music saved my life. And the role of a music therapist is incredible, but it's not like a politician can go on TV and brag about, we did this and now we have this, right? It's not like that. So we live in a very results-oriented culture. We don't live in a culture that's based really on kindness and empathy. And it's hard to study. It's hard to study to get empirical data on this person was in a better mood. Like it's hard to study that kind of thing. But what we know when we see it is the impact it has on people's lives. So that's why I wanted to help. We have two now. We help fund two people getting scholarships every year to become trained music therapists.
Wow. Have you seen the documentary or heard of the documentary Alive Inside?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Yeah, because again, I encourage everyone to watch that. And there's like the one famous clip of the man named Henry when he was. It's incredible, right? So, yeah, I definitely.
This is it, right? Because music is stored, at least that's what they'll say, is that music is stored in so many different parts of the brain. That is one part of your brain. And, with neuroplasticity, it's hard to, where's the song? Where's your favorite song? So it's all over us. It's the power of it's the power of expression, the power of art, the power of all this stuff. But it's more than just saying, I'm going to play it. Like that works for me. Yeah. But in the hand of like I said, in a trained therapist who really understands the way to reach somebody, I mean, that's like, there's nothing like it.
Yeah, no, and I think, again, it goes back to like why when you introduce a song to someone who hasn't heard it in a long time, it just brings back these memories for them. So it's, very important. And I hope I could, I want to look more into it. Okay, so again, you've done lots of interviews, getting known a lot on the hour. And I know someone asked you this before, a few people, and they've asked you, what was your most important interview? Or one of the most important interviews you said was with June Callwood. And I actually just discovered, I didn't realize it was on YouTube, and luckily it is. It's a very short interview. It's like 8-10 minutes long. And basically, I guess I didn't know her at all, but she's a journalist, or she was a journalist, activist, humanitarian. And she chose you to interview her, to be her last interview, correct? Right.
That's cool. Yeah.
So I want to know how that felt for you. And if I hate like hypotheticals, but it's like, if you know when you're going to pass away, is there someone that you would want to interview you?
I'm taking all these secrets to the grave. I'm taking them all. June, when June Callwood, her people reached out and asked if I would do her last interview, my initial response was, she has a lot of friends who are journalists. Shouldn't she, like, I don't want to take that away from her or them, right? And she said, her response was no, because this interview is going to go dark, and she knows you're not afraid of the darkness. So let's go dark. And I said, okay, let's do that. So what you saw was the cut down that went to air. There was a version that was about 20 minutes that went to air.
Okay.
But I actually interviewed her for about 90 minutes. And what I did with that interview is we gave the interview to her family and her trust fund and just said, here, it's for you. This is just for you and her. So we didn't air the whole thing. We didn't air the whole thing intentionally. We wanted some of it to be there. Yeah, June, I've never had an interview before where somebody started by saying, I have so many tumors, I even named this one after you, right? I'd never had that happen in my life. You know, June Callwood, growing up in Toronto, June Callwood's this amazing legend, and she opened, you know, the first AIDS hospice in the Western world. There's a very famous photo that went around back in the day when people were afraid of, you know, being in the room with somebody, an AIDS patient. She was holding the hand of a young man dying. My mother was a nurse at the time, and I remember her coming back and talking to me about this disease that didn't even have a name yet. I think at the time they were calling it GRID. It wasn't called AIDS. It was called GRID, and it was early. Some people were calling it the gay cancer. That's how little they understood it, how closed-minded they were. Like, there were all these things that were going around, and a lot of misinformation. Generally, you know, we know who's putting that forward. But June, who had the heart bigger than the city, creates this hospice. And when Princess Diana came down, she went there and she met that met that man back there. And that's where that photo went around. That was a very impactful photo. That's June. She started Casey House. Like, she just like iconic. I had only met her once before. Somebody just said I look like Richard Grieco. Which era? Any era is better, but I'll take it all. But I had only met her briefly at CBC when she was doing a little quick segment for our show, not an interview, just like 2 or 3 moments, because I was such a fan of hers, and she liked our show, so that's why she used to watch our show, and that was it. So the next time that I saw her was when we did that last interview, and I think that's part of the reason why, is because she was like, no, he knows me, I know him, but we don't really know each other, so let's get into it. And that was that interview was real. She was gone like not that many days after that. You know what really broke my heart about that too was that what's gone is all that accumulated knowledge. All that accumulated knowledge, you know, what she was doing was incredible, and that went with her. She shared as much as she could, but it went with her. You know, well, she's one of a kind.
You said you didn't really know her before that interview, right?
Not personally. I mean, I knew who she was, but not personally.
Right. So I wonder if maybe it was also going to be more difficult for her if one of her colleagues interviewed her, because again, they knew her personally, and again,
who knows? She wasn't the kind of person that was afraid of much, right?
Okay.
She wasn't the kind of person that was afraid of much. She really I think she just wanted to like get into it, and I think when the person doesn't know you, the person doesn't. You know, like I didn't have the same backstory relationship that her friends would have had, so I was able to approach it like a conversation, like a real interview.
Yeah, and she obviously appreciated that, and
she was lovely. And then when her husband, who I used to read, a sports reporter called Trent, came into the room when we were talking about her end of life stuff, she would whisper it a little bit because he was still having a tough time coming to terms with the fact that she was going to be gone soon. And Trent Frame, what an amazing man he was. He is no longer with us too. They're reunited. But yeah, so it was just the tenderness with which she approached her end of life, thinking of him, was pretty beautiful.
You've done thousands of interviews. Are there anyone that you wish you could have interviewed or you'd like to still interview?
Bob Dylan.
Okay.
Bob Dylan, man. Bob Dylan is like, I don't think there's anybody who's ever been better than him. So he's kind of like the greatest of all time in my mind. I'd like to talk to Neil. And, you know, music, there's lots, you know, like Neil Young and Pete Townsend. There's like a lot of the great musicians. I've been lucky to interview Patty and Joan Jett and Missy Elliott. So I've interviewed so many of the greats, you know, Mary Gauthier, but I've never had a chance to interview Bob. But in the outside non-music world, there's plenty. Yeah, there's so many. To be honest with you, I like interviewing Tom Waits, yes, Andrea, that's right. But like up and coming artists who are just really interesting. What I want to interview, here's really, so it's less about the person that I want to interview, but it's a mindset that I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody who doesn't want to be part of the bullshit machine. I'm looking for somebody who wants real talk. In that the real value of an interview, a conversation, is not about me, it's not about them. It's about the space we create for the person who's at home who maybe isn't having the best day. Yes, Prince, but Prince passed away. I never got to interview Prince, but I did get to talk to Prince. Which is pretty cool. We talked basketball. So yeah, I'm looking for people who want a real talk because I want to provide value to somebody living at home who's just sitting there going, fuck, how do I break through this? And one little piece of information in the right context could impact them. That's what I'm really looking forward to. You know who I just saw the other day was Al Jorgensen from Ministry. I love Ministry. I've interviewed him before. I've interviewed him twice. I want to interview him again. Like, Al is just, what a brain. What a brain. But I'd like to interview the Pope. I think that'd be interesting. That'd be cool. I'd like to interview the King. Now, I interviewed the King when he was the Prince.
Yeah, yes.
I interviewed him when he was the Prince, but I'd like to interview him as the King. I have questions. There's a lot of people that I'd love to have conversations with.
Of course, absolutely. Talking about real talk, and I'm glad you mentioned that because it reminded me, I wanted to ask you this, especially you, because every other interview I've done, it's all been Canadian artists and Rick, although he's an artist in his own sense of how he worked on TV. Okay. But because again, me being in radio just for a little bit, but knowing the Canadian industry and the bubble, a lot of artists struggle to get out that bubble and achieve that success. And then when you say people like Drake and The Weeknd, well, they got the push from the US and that blew them up. But I want to get your opinion on why a lot of Canadian artists struggled over the last few decades, and even to this day, like why they struggle to get outside of Canada. What's your opinion on it, at least?
Well, not to be a contrarian, but I have a couple of things. Number one, I don't think Drake and The Weeknd got the push from the US. I think that they blew up in the US, which is, I think, different. Like, I think that what Drake and The Weeknd did are out of this world. Like, there's lots of Canadian artists who get lots of push from US labels and have great success. But what Drake and The Weeknd have done that's stratospheric, right? The other thing is that I don't think Canadian artists struggle to break big outside of Canada. And the reason I say that is that you got to take the United States out of the picture because it is a global marketing behemoth, right? And when Jack Valenti and Bill Clinton, then President Bill Clinton, were traveling around the world selling free trade agreements, Hollywood and their exports were included in that. When you look at the reparations the United States helped provide to some countries post-World War II, part of the deal in that was they would run U.S. movies in those theaters. So the United States is a gigantic marketing exercise. So take that out, right, from the thing. Find me the biggest bands in Sweden, the biggest bands in the UK, the biggest bands in New Zealand, just pick them and see how they do in other countries. They generally all do the same. Like, you have a handful of artists who, break big, but you see these really amazing bands who would play for 10,000 people in London are playing for 1,000 people in Toronto. And that's the number. I went to see a band from Canada play sold out at the Webster's Hall in New York. Enormous crowd for them. Like, bigger at home, doesn't matter. So what I think is that we tend to think about it in the context of the U.S., but we're looking at something that's not relative. It's not relative, right? I think that our bands, like, I see lots of Canadian bands play here, and they play great rooms. Just like I saw those bands from England come play here, or those bands from Sweden play at the Elma Combo. They play much bigger shows. You're always going to be bigger in your home country. And there are always going to be the exception to the rule, but they are the exceptions. They are the exceptions. I really believe that. And so I think the narrative that we struggle to break in the US is the wrong narrative. And I'm not saying you're doing that because you asked it as a question, but one of the reasons why I haven't paid attention to most music journalism is in the modern era is because it's like, I just don't think I don't think they're paying attention to the story, right? Which is the real story, which is how amazing it's happened. I saw the Tragically Hip play all over the world, packed houses, right? They weren't playing arenas, but who else? Like, what's the biggest band in New Zealand? Are they playing arenas? Are the biggest band from Sweden? Maybe ABBA, but that's how I look at it. So I just encourage people to reframe it a little bit, because we're all talking about the U.S. and the U.S. is really they're not playing in the same game that we're playing. Not at all.
Interesting. Okay, no, I appreciate that answer. I definitely will have to think about that moving forward. Because I've asked other artists, like I said, and one person, and this was specifically for R&B and hip hop, he said he feels like there's no collaboration with other artists. Like he compared to the U.S. where these artists do collaborate, but in Canada they didn't. So that's why they didn't blow up, in his opinion.
Yeah. Well, look, I think there are a lot of reasons why an artist isn't bigger than they ought to be.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't think that it's connected to anything to do with them. I just don't think it's anything to do with them. I think there's lots of great artists. Like, you go around the world, you won't find, honestly, I say this and I don't care who wants to at me at it, you won't find better songwriters than Jim Cuddy and Greg Keeler in Blue Rodeo. Like, you won't. Like, you might find songwriters as good, but those guys write unbelievable songs. And they did well when they tour around the world, but they're not going to do what Nickelback did, because Nickelback's the only one who did it. Nickelback and Rush and Neil Young with Crazy Horse, think about it, right? Like, how many play arenas outside their country? Very, very. Now Drake can, Weeknd can, Avril plays big shows. I guess Celine, because Celine's the queen. Celine can do it, but there aren't many. If you think about how many artists we turn out, I actually think Canadians, we outkick the coverage. We have way more stars break in the U.S. In terms of the commercial game than I think a lot of people realize.
Why do you think Nickelback?
Shania, that's right.
In your opinion, why does Nickelback get so much hate?
Do you want a real answer?
I want, of course.
Because I think people are fucking boring. So, in our industry, I think people like to pile on. I think if somebody doesn't like something, they think it must be shit. Here's what I can say about Nickelback. Take this for what it's worth. I've done this for 33 years. I was there before Nickelback were famous. I was there watching them play the noon slot on every tour. Nobody's worked harder than Nickelback. Like, nobody put in the work quite like Nickelback. That band worked. And by the way, they wrote their own songs. But you know what happened, right? When Nickelback was becoming big, it was the rise of hipster culture. And hipster culture, with their $1,700 coffees and their fucking outfits that make them look like they're Civil War reenactors, which is not a knock. You can do it. They just decided to pile on. But I found them to be I just found that kind of music criticism to be just not that interesting. You don't have to like them. I don't care. I like Nickelback. There's a lot of things they say in songs that I don't like lyrically. It's like, that's not a vibe for me. That's not my vibe at all. But they're a Canadian band who wrote their own songs that had the most played song on the radio in the United States. Like, enormous. But it just happened to coincide at a time with, when they asked me to present them with their, I think, Canada's Walk of Fame. I'll give you an example. I was asked before to present at Canada's Walk of Fame. And CTV, this is how it was related to me. CTV said no. He's a CBC guy. He can't do it. This is what was told to me. Years later, Nickelback was getting Canada's Walk of Fame. They said, we want me to introduce them. They got the same pushback. And Nickelback said, no, it's going to be him. And so I did it happily. When I walked that red carpet, I had a whole bunch of people on the red carpet interviews asking me questions, trying to get me to make fun of Nickelback. It's the only time that's ever happened, by the way, ever, on a red carpet. And because it's just so Canadian it's really like, not just Canadian, because other countries do it, but we're the satellite country at the time from the England and France, the way the colonizers set it up, the influence of the United States. There was a whole bunch of stuff that plays into why Canadians see things the way they do. But I would walk the red carpet and I had all these too cool for school people trying to make fun of this band who outworked everybody. By the way, these people would go back and listen to fucking bands who didn't even write their own songs, right? And had no real influence on their impact on their own career. And I watched Nickelback do it the hard way, the whole way. So that when I finally introduced them on stage at the Walk of Fame, I think it was the Walk of Fame. Yeah, it was the Walk of Fame. As I'm getting off stage, shaking their hand, Ryan from the band gives me the hug and says, "Hey, thanks, man. There goes your career." Because he knew that I was going to get hate for it. I have no hate for Nickelback whatsoever. And I find you don't have to like their songs. You can also challenge their lyrics. Fucking A. Cool, you can do that. But the sort of like boring pile-on from people who are so cool, I fucking hate that. I hate that. I found it so boring. That's honestly what I think. And again, not every band that I interview, I don't like their music, but I believe they're doing stuff, right? I got to believe in what they're doing. Nickelback worked their ass off.
Yeah, no, totally, and I respect that. I'm not a fan of saying like, hey, like I deserve this or you deserve, just saying I deserve something. But I'm curious, do you feel like there's any bands or artists that didn't get enough credit in your opinion, or deserved more success or recognition?
I think people should give a lot of love to Cardinal Official. I think Cardinal Official, as a Toronto kid, representing the way I grew up in neighborhoods that were very Caribbean. The way he represented Caribbeans, Jamaicans, how interesting his music was. Cardinal, Chaos, Michi Me, Chauclair, Socrates, that era of hip hop in, Canada was incredible. And they really paved the way. Michi Me was the first hip hop artist, I believe, from Canada to get a record deal in the United States. Of course, Maestro, the coach, the legend, the teacher. So I think that era, the bands that there's a band from the 905 called Grade that I think were world class, signed to Victory Records, so they got some love in their genre. Protest the Hero, Alexis on Fire, they found their audience. I didn't forget Maestro. I mentioned Maestro. And so, yeah, there are just so many of those artists that from that late 90s, early 2000s, Masari is dope. Another great artist. So there's Watchmen were great songwriters. They were really great songwriters. We have great songwriters coming out of Canada. I remember when Nelly Furtado was driving around the U.S. in her van, in her jean vintage skirt, just playing with an electric guitar, building it. Somebody, Amber in there mentioned Crownlands. Watch Crownlands. Watch what they're doing. I think they're going to get lots of stuff. Now, the best band from Canada ever, for me, is a band called Propagandhi from Winnipeg. They're the most impactful band, Propagandhi, in my life. And those who know. But they should get talked about in a much bigger way. And there's a band from Vancouver called DOA, a punk band that in the punk circles, we know and love them. But they changed the game because they were the first ones to write down the numbers really of a list of what city you would go to and what venue you would call and how you would tour. So all the SoCal punk bands back in the day would get that list from DOA, and that helped create the touring system for punk and hardcore that didn't get any support at all. So those cats like DOA, they didn't just have great music that they should be celebrated for, but they had impact on the business in a way that they don't get enough credit for. But I mean, the punk bands will shout them out. They'll talk about them.
Would you, how's the Strombo?
Yo, dude, somebody wrote Dayglow Abortions. I loved Dayglow Abortions. Oh my God. I loved that band.
Yeah, these are obvious. Now, me personally, I didn't grow up with punk or metal too much, so, but in Propagandhi, that's a punk band? Or they were a punk band? Or are they still around?
Punk hardcore band. They're still around. They're better now. They're heavier now. Okay. And they're a game changer. They're one of those bands on the right side of history and have been for a long time.
Okay, I definitely want to check them out.
Stephen James Pierce wrote Sloan, of course, Sloan. They were the theme song for our talk show for a lot of years. I love Sloan. I feel like more people should know Sloan.
Do you play any or a little bit of, or how, like on Apple Music on your radio, do you play like a bit of Canadian con, or how
Yeah,
much
yeah,
would you say? Yeah,
yeah, totally. We play it. Somebody said they don't think Propaganda's heavier now. I think there's versions of Propaganda that are pretty. Somebody at my door again. Sorry, hold on a
get the
second.
door. Yeah, no, that's okay. And thank you guys for commenting. Sorry, I don't know if you guys were asking questions, but um, George is obviously incredible and gives
Sorry,
amazing
say it again.
answers.
Sorry, say it again.
Oh, I was just chatting. I was like just thanking people and commenting. It was like, yeah, you're just giving great answers. So I don't know. Sorry, we can like end this soon. I know it's been a while. So thank you though for taking notes.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I guess a couple more questions. House of Strombo, that ended like, well, it stopped because of COVID, I assume, right? So
Yeah.
what, any plans do you want to start it up again?
Oh yeah, I'll definitely bring it back. But you know what the thing is right now? It's like honestly, I want to do it, but what I don't want is to deal with like who's wearing a mask, who's not wearing a mask. Everybody, are you fucking back? I don't want to deal with any of that shit. Like, so I understand it. Everybody has their point of view. I don't give a fuck. I just don't want to have that conversation now. I'm going to wait till the time that I feel ready. Like I'm ready now. But when I get the right band who wants to do it, and I don't got to listen to a bunch of fucking crazy shit about it, then I'll do it. Like if everybody, yes, I want everybody to wear a mask in the house because I think it's a small house and be tight. But I'm not going to fucking make people do it. So I'll just do my thing. I'll wait till it's the right time and I get the right band. But I'm definitely going to bring it back.
Okay, awesome. One other thing I wanted to mention, I don't know why I thought of this, is weird. So again, talking about your mom and growing up, her nickname for you was Bucky, right? Right? Okay. So nickname was Bucky. And then when you do other interviews, everyone's talking about how curious you are. And I'm like, has no one ever called you? I mean, obviously it's a trademark thing, but like Curious George. No? Never?
Yeah, I definitely got that for sure. But I was a pretty shy kid, so you didn't actually hear me be particularly curious till I got a lot older, right? But I definitely got Curious George because I used to get into trouble. So I definitely would get in a bunch of trouble when I was a kid. But my mom called me Bucky because she read a book by Jack London called Call of the Wild, and the dog, the protagonist, is called Buck. Bucky with big brown eyes, so she said I had my eyes are like the puppy dog's eyes in the book, so that's why she calls me that. I got called Snuffy a lot, definitely. A lot of people call me Snuffy because of Snuffleupagus.
I watched when you were promoting your new show on CNN with James Tapper. Who was it? James Tapper?
Jake Tapper.
Jake Tapper.
He was like, guy.
Oh yeah, amazing. But then he was like saying all like the names like Snuffleupagus and other, and it was just like, okay, like whatever. It was.
You know what? It's true. It's got me out of a lot of trouble, my last name. So I had a situation a little while back where, some stuff was going down, and when they asked for my ID, the cops, they looked at it and they just said, "Are you fucking kidding me? Like, what is that?" And I went, "Yeah, that's my name." And they said, "Do you want to fucking write a report with all this shit?" What? So I'm like, well, you don't have to. You could just give me the license and I can leave, which is what happened. So my name, I'm not one of those guys that's offended by it. I mean, I've had everybody hurl an insult at me for my name or just for being who I am on TV. So I don't get offended by any of that. But I got stopped on the street by an older Greek guy one day in a wheelchair, motorized wheelchair, who said to me, "Hey," he goes, "you're too young to really appreciate what it means that you kept your name." And then he started crying. He says, "You don't know how when we came here to this country, they wouldn't let us keep our names. They made us shorten them. The fact that he said, you're this glorious name on television with all those letters." He goes, "That's a statement for all the people who are not from here, right? All the ethnics in Canada, they see that name and they're like, fucking A." And that's a testament to Bob Makowitz in radio. And then when I started, and because when I was in BC, they wouldn't let me keep my name. I could only go by initials. I was actually told that ethnic thing might fly in Toronto, but it's too ethnic for here. That's what I was told when I was in BC in the early part of my career. So, and then it was also a real testament to Moses Znaimer. And Moses Znaimer creating City TV and letting people go on and be themselves, be their ethnicity. Like, people weren't really doing that. And Moses created a space where we could do that. So that's quite a thing.
Wow. And so you probably didn't maybe realize at the time that just by having your real name on there really had an impact on people, right? So It's
Yeah,
incredible.
totally. I also, you know what? Also, like I said, my name is 17 letters. It's fucking insane. So the fact that somebody's going to misspell it, like, I'm not going to get mad at them. They're going to mispronounce it. My name's insane. There's a class war going on. They have to feed their fucking family. There's all these other considerations in their life. The fact that they don't know how to pronounce my name is not an issue. And so I do not take it personally at all.
No, I respect that, and I totally agree with that. Just another question, and you talked about this with Natasha Kaufman, who you've done work with, some charity work. If you can answer this question, you mentioned you're working on a tech project or company. Can you say anything about that, or if you can't, that's okay. Nope.
I cannot.
But you are working on something.
I am, but I cannot say.
Cool. That's all I need to know. That's awesome.
Yeah.
He's working on something.
I've got 3 different things on the go. One's tech, 2 are not. That are non-media related stuff. But it's a different experience. Yeah, for sure. I love it. I actually quite love doing that kind of stuff too. I like learning. I like pushing myself. I like trying new things.
Awesome. No, I mean, I could talk to you for hours, especially just about Much, but I just want you to go enjoy. Probably you need to eat something, right? You just got back from a trip.
That was my food.
No, again, thank you, and thank you for everyone who tuned in. But thank you, George. Again, I appreciate you giving me some time, and I'm definitely going to talk to Rick. Do you care if I message Rick and tell him what you told me that he
texted me. He's the one, yeah.
Okay, because I want to thank him because that's incredible that he would do that. So, thank you again, and I just look forward to what you have to do in the future. So,
thanks, buddy. I really appreciate your time, John. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for all the questions and the comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right.